Fly like an eagle to the sea. Fly like an eagle. The spirits that you be, I'm gonna fly. Fly right into the future. Time keeps on slipping into the future. Fly like an eagle to the sea.
Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
All right. Happy Tuesday, guys. Welcome to Sabby's podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you are new, I want to let you know that Sabby's podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Thursdays for the Sabby and JB show. And you can catch me here on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday. Shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, Twitter, and Rumble. And welcome back, guys. I hope you've had a great weekend. We have some tea to get into tonight. I have a special guest that's also going to be coming on Friday evening to talk about one of the stories that I'm discussing tonight, because a lot more is being revealed. You know, because of this conflict with Israel and Gaza, there's a lot more information that's starting to come out. And I think you're going to like the guest that's coming on this Friday. But first and foremost, I want to go ahead and give shout outs to people in the chat. What's going on? Miguel says peace. Shout out to Aspen Fallen. Lots of tea this episode. Yes, Aspen Fallen. Lots of tea. Greetings. Oxal says a bunch of different emojis there. Welcome. Shout out to David says, Sabby, check out a song called God Rest Ye Billionaires. I can do that. Greetings. Hannah says, ready for the JFK story. That one is probably going to be, I would say that's probably the big story of the night, if I had to pick between the ones that I'm covering. Shout out to Lawrence, who's a Sabby member, says, Shaka, when the walls fell. Greetings, Soul says, time for spilling the tea with Sabby. Shout out to Larez. Sup, Sab, Eric, and Sabby fam. Can't wait for the JFK story. Ridiculous. Colorado Supreme Court cut Trump from the 2024 ballot. Wow. Hope Supreme Court fixes. And can't believe you were banned on TikTok. Glad you're back on, you rebel. Yes, I'll tell you about that in a second for those who are not aware. Shout out to Jacqueline says, hi, everyone. Greetings, Joe says, greetings, family. Shout out to Sean Miller. Sup? Sean giving a salute there. Greetings, Gamer says, hello. Shout out to Cowboy Kitty. What's going on? Nikki's World says, hello, everyone. Shout out to Gus says, hello, Sabby, and everyone watching. What's going on? Gala, who's a Sabby member, says, nice, Sabby. Love this song. You know, that's probably my favorite song by Steve Miller Band. Do you guys like Steve Miller Band? Because, I don't know, Steve Miller Band, like, I felt like their music started to change a little bit. Like, they were known for songs like The Joker, right? And, you know, the Fly Like an Eagle song, that is one of my favorite songs by Steve Miller. Then you jump into like parts of the 80s and they released this song called Abracadabra, which just seemed to be so different from any other like song that they recorded previously. Different sound, different vibe, you know? So they were kind of, you know, shifting a little bit as time went by, but I like their older songs. Shout out to a kid says, hi, Sabby and crew. Greetings, Christmas Sheep says, like button just got smashed. Thank you so much for that. Greetings, Metal Music says, Sabby. Metal Music, speaking of metal, since we're talking about music, Someone was asking me before, they were like, I know you like all different types of music. Have you ever listened to heavy metal? Yes, but I don't go too heavy with the metal. Not too heavy, right? So I'm not really rocking with Slipknot. Do you consider them heavy metal? I forget the name of it. My husband knows the name of the band that I won't listen to because it sounds scary. I forget the name of them, but they're like, whoa, is it Slayer? Anyway, so when it comes to like heavy metal, like I'll listen to like Five Finger Death Punch. They're kind of heavy, but they're not too heavy. Does that make sense? Do we still consider Metallica to be heavy? You guys consider them to be heavy metal? I'll listen to Metallica. But it's about as heavy as I get is like Five Finger Death Punch. And that's it. Some of the other ones, I think it is Slayer, the ones that sound kind of scary. But some of the other ones, not so much for me. Shout out to Corey, who's a Sabby member, says, hello all. What's going on, Zen Soulful? Also a Sabby member says, good evening. Shout out to Leroy, says, good day, everyone. Leroy's also a Sabby member. Shout out to Notori, says, yas. Greetings, Lyle, says Sabby. Shout out to, making sure I'm not skipping someone. Shout out to Rick, says, hey, y'all. And greetings, Caleb, says, love Sabby. Thank you guys so much. I was looking to see if anybody answered to the, oh no. Okay. 4737 Carlin said Metallica are about on the same level as Bon Jovi. Really? I always felt like Metallica was heavier than that. Heavier on that, in my opinion. Kill Your Gorgie says Metallica is awesome. Lyle says listen to Opeth. Interesting. Okay, let's go ahead and give a shout out to Sabby patrons. We will do call-in tonight, so you can tell me about your heavy metal suggestions on call-in as well. Shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories. Ultimate, Sabinators, there's Sabsters, there's also Sabbies, and we cannot forget members. Dun, 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 dun. Thank you guys so much for your support. All of their names are here, and you can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker. I'm laughing at the comments about the music. And I want to give a special shout out to a new Sabby patron. Over here, we call them newbies. Let's give it up for Jane Forrest. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm interested to hear your heavy metal takes on call-in tonight, guys. All right, what are we going to discuss tonight, ladies and gentlemen? Something a little bit different because I'm looking at someone in the past, which I don't usually do on this show, but this is an important story that just broke a couple of days ago. So tonight we are discussing Briahna Joy Gray debates pundit. That is a very interesting discussion. I got to give kudos there to Bri for pushing back in such a way that was how can I say it? She pushed back on her in such a way that was very confident without being seen as emotional or unhinged. And in fact, the person that she was debating, that woman, I felt like she was she was on the unhinged side, right? So she effectively pushed back on that. We're going to talk about that in reference to Israel and Gaza. We're also going to discuss the IDF attacks goes wrong. Those 3 gentlemen that you see there were hostages, and they were actually attacked by the IDF. We're going to get into that story. We're also going to discuss Alec Baldwin rage. Some may wonder, when is Alec not in rage? Alec did something last night at one of the pro-Palestinian protests, and I think I may know why Alec is so, we're going to talk about something else that happened to him recently. We're also going to discuss JFK reveal, breaking news, recent article here from Rick. We're going to dive into that article about what Rick has discovered about JFK and why that pertains to what's happening with Israel and Gaza today. That's probably the biggest story of the night. And we're also going to discuss this recent report about the crime wave, which may not be what you think. So we're going to get started. I started doing weekly shout outs on this show like a week ago, and then I think I skipped a week. So I'm back at it. So this week we are giving a shout out to Briahna Joy Gray, Bad Faith Podcast. If you have not heard, Bri actually just reached 100,000 subscribers. You can see it here for yourself on Bad Faith. She announced it on Twitter. So there's Bad Faith Podcast, 100K subscribers. She's been doing the damn thing. If you're on Twitter, go by, give her a shout out on Twitter, give her a what's up and tell her, congratulations, because I think we all know, given the recent censorship or more censorship now and more suppression with independent media on YouTube, it is not easy to get to 100K subscribers today as it was, say, 4 years ago. So that is a huge accomplishment, particularly for someone on the left. I feel like left media, there's more suppression. If you're not a part of like that, the right media, part of like the Daily Wire crew, those of us on the left, we are heavily suppressed. So that is not easy to accomplish today. So the shout out this week goes to Briahna Joy Gray, Bad Faith Podcast, 100K subscribers. And we're going to get into the first story. Alec Baldwin has not been having the best year. Recently, if you hadn't heard, they were charging him with manslaughter in reference to him killing someone on the set of the movie Rust. Obviously, Alec Baldwin said he did not do this intentionally. There was a mix-up. We'll get into all that after this part here. But there's that piece, right? Now he's being recharged. Wait for it. And then apparently the other night, Alec Baldwin came across some of the pro-Palestinian protesters in New York, and Alec Baldwin had some things to say. As you know, Alec Baldwin is not known for being nice and friendly. So just imagine that. I want you to hear what Alec Baldwin had to say and why this is problematic. This is coming from Loki. He says, "That's a stupid question. Hollywood actor Alec Baldwin refuses to condemn Israel and squares up to pro-Palestinian protesters in New York." Check this out.
What do you mean? What do you mean? You went to Hollywood. Do you condemn Israel for the action?
No, he has to support us.
Guys and children?
You already got your mind made up. Whatever question you got, right?
Oh, they're asking you a question.
I'm in Hollywood.
Is that your answer? Is that your answer?
You ask stupid questions.
Do you condemn?
Ask me a
Jesus,
smart
no
question.
one. Do you condemn Israel? Do you condemn Israel? Do you condemn Israel? Big man. Big man. Do you condemn Israel? Why'd you even come here? Why'd you even come here? Just so you dumbass. Zayden, get out of here! Get out of here! Not this nonsense, come on. Send him back to Europe.
So let's pause here for a second and we'll revisit through this. So Alec Baldwin was asked, do you condemn Israel for what, they're doing, the indiscriminate bombing on Gaza? And Alec Baldwin, again, like I told you, not known for being nice and friendly. This is the same guy that actually criticized his own daughter, who was still a minor at that time, publicly. That's how Alec Baldwin is. He was previously married to Kim Basinger. Kim Basinger had some things to say about him being verbally abusive. He's just kind of a jerk at the end of the day, just kind of a jerk. But the question that some people had is, first of all, why were you there to just basically aggravate things and start protesting?
No, he has to support us.
Guys and children?
You already got your mind made up. Whatever question you got, right?
Oh, they're asking you a question.
I'm in Hollywood.
Is that your answer? Is that your answer?
You ask stupid questions.
So he told the protester, he said, "You ask stupid questions." I didn't think that was a stupid question.
Do you condemn?
Ask me a smart question.
Here he is being aggressive, getting into his face.
You condemn Israel? Big man. Big man. You condemn Israel. Why'd you even come here? Why'd you even come here? Just so you dumbass.
So here's something I want to point out. Notice how he's protected by the police. See, look, watch this. So see how the police, here's NYPD here and here. See how they're looking out for Alec Baldwin to make sure that he's okay. Yeah, see, he's a celebrity. See, the cops are going to protect him. The cops don't protect the protesters. They harass the protesters, right? Some of them have been brutal towards the protesters, have physically hit protesters. But Alec Baldwin gets special treatment because he's rich. Because he's rich. Now, there was more in reference to this. I want to let me go back for just a second because I wanted to add this part too, because Status Quo was actually there as well. And I do want to make sure I get the second part of that clip because he was just, unhinged. Let me come down here because I think there was another. This is a longer version here. So I want to play this one.
Oh, that's your question.
I'm in Hollywood, so watch what you say. You ask stupid questions.
Can the media go? Yo, who the fuck you think you is, yo?
So you see, I wanted you to see it from this angle as well, because that's Alec Baldwin again lunging toward the protesters because he didn't like the question that they asked him. And who do the police protect? The police don't try to protect the protester when Alec Baldwin is lunging at them. They protect wealth. They protect Alec Baldwin. I wanted you to pay close attention to that.
Shut the fuck up.
Alec Baldwin.
Let's make sure Alec Baldwin is able to walk through the streets and not be harassed by anyone, even though at that point in time, who was being threatening? Who was the threat? Was it the protesters or was it Alec Baldwin?
Nice to see you, man. But you killed somebody, you know that, right?
Stop crying. Stop crying. I can't believe you're crying so much.
This is the part a lot of people are criticizing Alec Baldwin for when he said, stop crying. I'm sorry. When it comes to genocide, Alec Baldwin believes that you should stop crying. Dry your tears. That's not something you should cry over. You see this? See, I like for people to see how these celebrities really are in real life when they're not filming a movie or doing an interview that they're paid to do. This is who a lot of them really are. Stop crying, he said.
Stop crying. No, but I want peace for Gaza.
He wants peace for Gaza, but he wants them to stop crying about it. So he wants peace for Gaza, but he's not willing to condemn what the state of Israel is doing to Palestinians in Gaza. And he wants the protesters to stop crying about it. How are they supposed to get peace if it's not for the outcry of all the protests? Because let's be real, our government wasn't even going to, you think Joe Biden would have made the statement that Israel's doing indiscriminate bombing if it wasn't for all the protests all over the world and the massive pressure from the public pushing back on this? No, he wouldn't have. We wouldn't have even gotten to this point had it not been for the direct action that's happening outside in the streets.
212.
Is this your new captain? I don't get it. I don't get it, Alec.
You're sick. You're sick. Why did Alec Baldwin get all this security? What, because you're a celebrity? You're just like...
Yeah. So the woman there towards the end was saying, why does Alec Baldwin get all this protection? Because he's a celebrity? Exactly. That just proves my point once again, that police protect capital. They protect the rich, the wealthy, not everyday working class folks. That's just how it is. Now, Alec Baldwin, again, not having a good year, because it turns out, this was also released a while back. It turns out that case that he had on the set of the movie Rust, it turns out that he is now being recharged for involuntary manslaughter. See, last time he thought he got off the hook because they said that they actually weren't able to actually prove, that he was negligent, so to speak. But now things are changing. Now they are coming back and now they're saying that actually we have more information and now we will be able to charge him again with involuntary manslaughter. Let's get into that.
This morning, prosecutors have revealed plans to potentially recharge Alec Baldwin for his alleged role in the deadly shooting on the set of his movie Rust, saying they'll soon present new evidence to a grand jury. The announcement coming more than 2 years after an accidental discharge during rehearsal killed cinematographer Helena Hutchins. During the initial investigation, Baldwin insisted he never fired the gun.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them, never.
Prosecutors dismissed the case against Baldwin back in April after the gun was reportedly determined to be mechanically improper. But now, prosecutors say, after an extensive investigation, additional facts have come to light and that they believe Mr. Baldwin has criminal culpability. Among the new evidence, a report that revealed the revolver in the shooting was found to function properly.
Pause. So let me explain what happened here for those of you who did not catch the story. I covered it like months ago. But basically, to make a long story short, when they were on the set, obviously you're not going to have real bullets, right? You're going to have like the shells, like the dummy bullets, right? So apparently what was revealed is that there were actually real bullets that were mixed in with the fake bullets on the set of the movie Rust. Somehow or another, one of those real bullets ended up in the prop gun that Alec Baldwin was using, fired it off, and it shot and killed one of the women that was on the set. She died. So obviously the family is not happy about this. And they said, no, someone needs to be held accountable. Now they're saying that the gun actually was working properly. So it appears Alec Baldwin obviously was not being honest about his role in that incident. Now, I want to explain something about manslaughter. Again, they're charging him this time around with involuntary manslaughter. So we got to think about this again. Manslaughter doesn't necessarily mean that this is first degree, that you plan this out to actually kill this person or shoot this person. But what it does say is that there is negligence. Now, where was the negligence? The fact that the producers and the directors, they all said that it is the actor's responsibility. They are responsible for checking those rounds to make sure that they're correct. Alec Baldwin did not do that. It was also revealed during this case when it was first reported that the director and the producer, they did not do this as well. So they also could be held liable. So when it's negligence, it doesn't mean that you meant to do it, but someone died. So there has to be some accountability. And so they're charging him again. So he is still not off the hook in reference to this particular situation.
And that the trigger had to be pulled for the weapon to fire. Lawyers for Baldwin responding saying it is unfortunate that a terrible tragedy has been turned into this misguided prosecution. Depending on the grand jury's decision, Baldwin could end up being charged with involuntary manslaughter, which carries a sentence of up to 18 months behind bars.
So there is that. So like I said, Alec Baldwin is just not having a good time. But one thing that I want to make clear to people too, notice how Hollywood plays favoritism towards certain people, right? Alec Baldwin actually killed this person. Whether it was involuntary or not, whether it was negligent or not, he did kill this person. And he did not do his job of checking those rounds, which he is instructed to do, before firing off that gun, then tried to say he didn't fire the gun, that it just went off by itself. Now you see that that's not true. But notice how Alec Baldwin has not been blacklisted from Hollywood. Alec Baldwin is still getting movie deals. Alec Baldwin is still getting interviews. Alec Baldwin is still okay in reference to Hollywood, despite all the other crazy shit that Alec Baldwin has done. But just this week, Jonathan Majors has now been found guilty of assault with his ex-girlfriend after they had already had video evidence to show that she wasn't telling the truth and wasn't where she says she was at that point in time. Jonathan Majors has already been blacklisted in Hollywood. Done. Done. That's the part they never answered. The Oracle said, and why were there real bullets on the set anyway? That's the part they never explained that. Nobody seemed to know how they got there. That was another part of the problem. But it doesn't look good. Does not look good. But it is what it is. Danny said Marvel just announced they're canceling Jonathan Majors' future role. Oh, yeah, he's done. He's done. Alec Baldwin, guys, protected by the NYPD. Let me go to some of the comments here in the chat. Thank you for the super chat, Roger. 53 years old in 12 hours, Sab. Okay, so let's give Roger an early happy birthday. Thank you, Elizabeth. Sure, appreciate all your work, Sabby. Glad to see your channel grow. Solstice greetings. Appreciate your perspective on Boston. I grew up in the South Shore, served at the Hadley House in Southie, left 40 years ago, still home. Oh, nice to meet you, Elizabeth. Thank you for the super chat, Metal Music. It looks like Alec Baldwin was planted there. IMO. And Soul says he ain't no OJ, the glove fit. Right? Does not look good for Alec Baldwin. Doesn't look good for him. Now we're moving into this JFK story, which I find fascinating. I just love it when people reveal information about some of these previous presidents that we've had that we may not have been aware of. And this article recently written by Rick Sterling, so on Mint Press News, Rick will be here Friday, not just to talk about this article, but some other things connected to this that he wants to discuss as well. But I want you to think about the situation that's happening in Israel and Gaza right now. I want you to think about some of the things that RFK Jr. has said in reference to where his father stood with Israel and where JFK stood with Israel as well. And then I want you to dive into this. From Dallas to Gaza, the JFK assassination was good for Zionist Israel. Grab your popcorn, grab some tea. We're going to get into this tonight. President JFK was assassinated 60 years ago. If he had lived and won a second term, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict would have evolved differently. Possibly the path towards Israeli apartheid and genocide in Gaza could have been avoided. In his short time in office, Kennedy significantly changed U.S. foreign policy. As documented in the book JFK and the Unspeakable, Why He Died and Why It Still Matters, JFK resisted the CIA and military-industrial complex in the policies he set regarding the Third World and the Soviet Union. The Vietnam War, the assassination of Indonesia's President Sukarno, and continued hostility to Cuba and the Soviet Union would not have happened had Kennedy lived and won a second term. So that makes you think maybe that has something to do with the reason why they decided that JFK had to go. And the reality is, he most likely would have won a second term. Less well known, Kennedy's policies also challenged and opposed the military and political ambitions of Zionist Israel. At the time, Israel had only existed for 13 years. It was still evolving, and the course was not set. There was a significant international resolve to find a compromise solution regarding Palestinian refugees from the 1948 Nakba. When Israel attacked Egypt and seized the Sinai Peninsula in 1956, the Eisenhower administration demanded Israel withdraw from the captured territory. They complied. At this time, In the early 1960s, prominent Jewish voices criticized the racism and discrimination of the Israeli government. Let me come out and say this again. Did you catch that? During that time, prominent Jewish voices criticized the racism and discrimination of the Israeli government. Israelis like Martin Buber assailed Ben-Gurion and noted that at the inception of the state, complete equality with the Jewish citizens was promised to the Arab population. Many influential Israelis realized their long-term security and well-being depended on finding a just settlement with the indigenous Palestinian population. In the United States, the Jewish community was divided and many were anti-Zionist. The American Council for Judaism was influential and anti-nationalist. Hear that? The racist and aggressive character of Israel was not yet set in stone, nor was American Jewish support for Israel. So again, people, this is before super PACs. This is before organizations like AIPAC actually had a foothold in Congress. Money changed everything, nor was American Jewish support for Israel. When Menachem came to the U.S. in 1948, prominent Jewish leaders, including Albert Einstein, denounced him. They said Begin, who later became Israeli prime minister, was a terrorist who preached an admixture of ultra-nationalism, religious mysticism, and racial superiority. Many American Jews had mixed feelings and did not identify with Israel. Others supported Israel, but based on there being peace with the indigenous Palestinians. That was in the 1960s. So don't let people tell you that you're crazy for wanting peace with the Palestinian people. There are 4 key areas where Kennedy's policy substantially differed from what followed his death. And there's a picture of JFK there. Now check this out. Despite what other people are telling you, Kennedy was not biased towards Israel. The Kennedy administration sought good relations with both Israel and Arab nations. Kennedy aimed to extend U.S. influence throughout the Middle East, including with countries friendly with the Soviet Union and at odds with NATO partners. JFK personally supported Arab and African nationalism. Say what? How many of you knew that? JFK supported Arab and African nationalism. Think about all the things that have happened after JFK died. Remember, Barack Obama said we had to go take Gaddafi out. They wanted to get rid of Gaddafi. Why? Because Gaddafi did not want to partner with the West, and he really wanted countries in Africa to rely on their own. He wanted to break away from the stronghold of the West. So they said he got to go. As a senator in 1957, he criticized the Eisenhower administration for supporting and sending weapons to France in their war against the Algerian independence movement. In a 9,000-word presentation to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he criticized Western imperialism and called for the U.S. to support Algerian independence. JFK criticized Western imperialism. Do you see it, guys? They couldn't allow someone like that to remain in the White House. Kennedy changed the previous frosty relations with the United Arab Republic, Egypt, and Syria, led by Gamal Abdel Nasser. For the first time, the U.S. approved loans to them. Kennedy wrote respectful letters to the Arab presidents before he welcomed Israeli Prime Minister Ben-Gurion to Washington. The Arab leaders could see the difference and responded with the appreciation. Those who claim there was no difference with Kennedy ignore that Egypt's Nasser, Algeria's Ben Bella, and other nationalist leaders saw a big difference. In 1960, Kennedy was campaigning for the presidency. He spoke at the Zionists of America convention. He made complimentary remarks about Israel, but also expressed the need for friendship with all the people of the Middle East. He said the U.S. should act promptly and decisively against any nation in the Middle East which attacks its neighbor, and the Middle East needs water, not war, tractors, not tanks, bread, not bombs. Some of the same things that people are criticizing today when we talk about the humanitarian need. Some people criticizing that. He said they needed those things back then. Kennedy frankly told the Zionists, "I cannot believe that Israel has any real desire to remain indefinitely a garrison state surrounded by fear and hate. By maintaining objectively and neutrality on the Israeli-Arab conflict, Kennedy wanted to steer Jewish Zionists away from the racist, aggressive, and ultra-nationalistic impulses that have led to where we are today." So when you hear RFK Jr. say his father would have done this, or JFK, they stood and by Israel and backed Israel, notice RFK Jr. isn't telling you that piece. That JFK wanted people to stay away from the racists and nationalists. And here you have RFK Jr. buddy with Rabbi Shmuley. It's important for people to understand. This piece right here is also very important. Kennedy wanted Israel to follow the rules. You don't say. The second difference in Kennedy's policy is regarding Zionist lobbying on behalf of Israel. Under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, organizations that promote or lobby on behalf of a foreign government must register and account for their finances and activities. Under Attorney General Robert Kennedy, the Department of Justice instructed the American Zionist Council to register as agents of a foreign country. AZC is the parent organization of the American Israel Public Affairs Council, also known as AIPAC. As documented in detail here on November 21st, 1962, the Assistant Attorney General wrote to them, "The receipt of such funds from the American sections of the Jewish Agency for Israel constitutes that the American Zionist Council, an agent of a foreign principal, the council's registration is requested." This brings up the point that some have made that when it comes to organizations like AIPAC, technically they're basically trying to lobby for a foreign nation, which is true. And so the point that JFK and RFK made back then is that they should have to register as agents of a foreign country. The emergence of Israeli political influence was also scrutinized in the Senate. Under Senator William Fulbright, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee held hearings in May and August 1963. They revealed that tax-free donations to the United Jewish Appeal, supposedly for humanitarian relief in Israel, were being channeled back to the U.S., where the money was used for lobbying and Israeli public relations. I call that fraud. Attorneys for AZC stalled for time. On August 16, 1963, a DOJ analyst reviewed the case and concluded, department should insist on the immediate registration of the American Zionist Council under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. October 11th, the DOJ demanded that the AZC register, and the department expects a response from you within 72 hours. On October 17th, the DOJ memorandum reports that attorneys for AZC pleaded for not being required to register as foreign agents. They offered to provide the necessary financial disclosures, but that registering as a foreign agent would be so publicized by the American Council on Judaism that it would eventually destroy the Zionist movement. So the point made is this: if you are lobbying on behalf of another country, you should have to register as a foreign agent. The politicians in this country are supposed to work for people in this country and help out this country. They pushed back heavily against that because they said it would hurt the Zionist movement. So when RFK gets on all these interviews and he tells people that his father stood with Israel and that JFK also stood with Israel, he should probably also mention this part too. As indicated in this discussion, political Zionism was not yet dominant in the American Jewish community and was actively opposed by the American Council on Judaism and other Jewish groups. Now, that is important because Jewish Voices for Peace is getting a lot of hate from people because they've been going to the pro-Palestinian protests and they're saying, not in our name. This is not how we feel. This is not okay. But I just want to remind you, during that time, during the 60s, the majority of the American Jewish community was like Jewish Voices for Peace. I'm so glad he wrote this article. Here's the third piece. Kennedy supported Palestinian rights. A third difference is regarding Palestinian rights. Although he was only 44 when he became president, Kennedy had more international experience than most U.S. presidents. In 1939, he spent 2 weeks in Palestine. He described the situation and difficulties in a lengthy letter to his father. He wrote, "The sympathy of the people on the spot seems to be with the Arabs. This is not only because the Jews have had at least some of their leaders an unfortunately arrogant, uncompromising attitude, but they feel that after all, the country has been Arabic for the last few hundred years. Palestine was hardly Britain's to give away." Oh. But see, if you're saying this today, if you're a politician and you make that statement that JFK said back then, you're the evil person. You're called anti-Semitic. In comments that are still true, Kennedy remarks how the Jewish residents are divided between a strongly Orthodox Jewish group unwilling to make any compromise and a liberal Jewish element composed of the younger group who fear these reactionaries. His analysis is sympathetic to both Jewish and Arab peoples and addresses the difficulty but necessity of finding a compromise solution. In the early 1960s, the U.S. State Department was not locked into a biased acceptance or approval of Israeli policies. The U.S. supported UN Resolution 194, which stated that refugees wishing to return to their homes and live at peace with their neighbors should be permitted to do so at the earliest practical date, and that compensation should be paid to the property of those choosing not to return, and for loss of or property damage, which under principles of international law or equity should be made good by the governments or authorities responsible. This has become known as the right of return. You'll see a picture of Kennedy there. It says JFK at the 1963 Anti-Defamation League Award Dinner in DC. So RFK likes to tell you that they did stand by Israel, JFK, and of course his father, RFK. But what he leaves out is that those organizations were not like that at that time. And he also leaves out the fact that JFK actually had sympathy for both the Israelis and the Palestinian people, and that he wanted a solution That brings us into the two-state solution idea and all those kind of things. Even back then, he said, stay away from the racist, nationalist rhetoric that's coming from the state of Israel. November 21st, 1963, the day before Kennedy's assassination, the New York Times had two news stories that exemplified the discord between Washington and Tel Aviv. A report from the United Nations is titled, Israel Dissents as UN Group Backs U.S. on Arab Refugees. It begins, a United States resolution calling for continued efforts to resolve the predicament of the Palestinian Arab refugees was approved tonight 83-1. Israel cast a single negative vote. The issue centers on the 1948 resolution, whose key section, paragraph 11, concerns the future of the Arabs who are displaced from their homes by the Palestine conflict. They have been living in the lands bordering Israel. The revised United text calls on the Palestinian Consolation Commission to continue its efforts for the implementation of paragraph 11. So do you see what they were trying to warn people about back then? The vote was 83-1. Israel was the negative vote. Again, I just want to remind people, this is before Hamas even existed. The point that I'm trying to make to you is that the Zionists didn't want the people there, period. They didn't want the Palestinian people there. So when people come to you, when they say, well, it's because of Hamas, send them, and we'll put this in the chat, send them this article. This was always the plan. The second New York Times story is titled, U.S. Stand Angers Israel. See what's happening? It reports from Jerusalem that Premier Levi Eshkol expressed extreme distaste today for the United States position in the Palestine refugee debate. Israel's anger was conveyed in the strongest terms to the U.S. ambassador. The Israeli government is upset about the American resolution before the UN Political Committee and by American maneuvers over the issue. Israel was angered and objected because the Kennedy administration was trying to resolve the Palestinian refugee situation, including the right of return. JFK wanted the Palestinian people to have the right of return. And if JFK would have lived and would have served a second term, that would have happened. And this is the final piece. Kennedy tried to stop Israel's nuclear program. The fourth and most considerable contention between Kennedy and the Israeli leadership was regarding their developing nuclear weapons. This issue was so secret that crucial documents and letters have only been released recently. President Kennedy was a strong advocate for stopping nuclear proliferation. After 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, he realized how easy it would be to intentionally or accidentally trigger a catastrophic nuclear war. If nuclear weapons were allowed to spread to more countries, the risk of global catastrophe would be all the greater. It was also predicted that if Israel acquired nuclear weapons capability, they would become more aggressive and less likely to reach a compromised agreement regarding Palestinian refugees. And look at where we are today. When intelligence indicated that Israel might be trying to build a nuclear weapon at Dimona in 1962, Kennedy was determined to find out if this was true, and if so, to stop it. This caused an intense diplomatic confrontation between JFK and Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion. The proof of this has recently been revealed in the exchange of letters between President Kennedy and Prime Minister Ben-Gurion and his successor, Levi Eshkol. They are all labeled top secret or eyes only. We weren't supposed to know about this. It is essential to see the sequence and some details to understand how intense this showdown was. These communications are all from 1963. Author's note, skip to the next section if you wish to skip the details outlined in the following exchanges. So we're going to skip some of this because it is kind of a lot here. But I do want to read this part. April 26, Israeli Prime Minister Ben-Gurion replied to President Kennedy. He evaded the issue of nuclear facility inspections and instead expressed his concern regarding a recent proclamation from Egypt, Syria, and Iraq. He compared Egyptian President Nasser to Germany's Hitler. You see this? So here is that documentation here. And again, we'll put the link in the chat so you guys can read this on your own time as well. I don't want to go through all of it because it is quite lengthy. But this part right here, you do need to see. For many years now, the rulers of the Arab states, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and others, have been making public declarations of their firm determination to obliterate Israel. So, do you see what was happening here? No, do not give the Palestinian people the right to return. No, you can't take away our nuclear weapons. We have to have those because we've been receiving threats from the Arab states that they're going to make Israel disappear, basically. They're going to get rid of all the Israeli people. Were those things actually true? I could fill quite a thick booklet with the pronouncement of rulers, army commanders, official newspapers, and the radio stations of Cairo, Damascus, Baghdad, and other Arab capitals on the destruction of Israel. In recent days, something unique, I believe, in the history of the nations has happened. On April 17th, a treaty of federation was signed in Cairo between the three countries, Egypt, Syria, and Iraq. Before he puts his signature to the treaty, the president of Egypt prayed to God for the success of the federation. If the Lord willed, he said, this would be the parent federation of all Arab states for the good of the Arab people. So the Arab states and the Arab people are not allowed to have some type of self-determination? Let's fast forward here because there's a lot of these documents. But I wanted you to actually see the documents because you can see they're now declassified. So, this isn't just Rick just writing an article based on what he heard. Rick actually had the receipts here. It's very long though. And it says this document is from the holdings of the National Security Archive. Now it goes on to say here, just want to jump to the end part here because they go through all these letters. And my apologies, it's very, 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 very long. This part. June 16th, the U.S. Embassy in Israel reported that Ben-Gurion resigned as Israel's prime minister. This was a huge surprise. The explanation was that it was for personal reasons. Ben-Gurion likely knew the contents of the forthcoming letter from Washington received at the embassy the day before. The impact of his resignation was to stall for time. U.S. Ambassador Barber suggested waiting until the cabinet problem is worked out before sending JFK's near ultimatum to the next prime minister. Kennedy did not wait long. On July 4th, he wrote to new Israeli Prime Minister Levi Eshkol. After congratulating Eshkol on becoming the new prime minister, he goes straight to the point concerning American visits to Israel's nuclear facility in Dimona. Kennedy says, I regret having to add to your burdens too soon after your assumption of office. But he then goes on to request inspections as was requested in the letter to Ben-Gurion, and that support of Israel could be seriously jeopardized if this is not done. So again, Ben-Gurion resigns to kind of stall so that Kennedy cannot come to Israel and have the inspection of the weapons, the nuclear weapons that they had. It goes on to say, July 17th, Eshkol wrote to Kennedy that he needed to study the issue more before responding to Kennedy's request to visit Dimona. Again, that's just more stalling. Okay. I need to study it more. August 19th, Eshkol wrote to Kennedy, reiterating Dimona's peaceful purpose and ignoring the request for a summer inspection. He proposed the inspection take place towards the end of 1963. August 26th, Kennedy wrote to Eshkol to accept the visit at year end, but emphasized that it needed to be done when the reactor's core is being loaded and before the internal radiation hazards have developed. Kennedy set these conditions because they were essential for determining whether the facility could be used for developing a nuclear weapon. September 16th, the State Department prepared a memorandum of conversation with a counselor from the British Embassy. There was joint concern, but agreement that Dimona would be visited and inspected prior to the activation of the reactor. This part right here. After LBJ became president, U.S. Mideast policy changed significantly. LBJ told an Israeli diplomat from the start, "You have lost a great friend, but you have found a better one." The Israeli publication Haaretz says historians generally regard Johnson as the president most uniformly friendly to Israel. The Washington Report on Middle East Affairs writes LBJ was the first to align U.S. policy with Israel's policies. Everybody listening to what's happening here? JFK was president. LBJ was vice president. JFK is assassinated. LBJ is promoted to president. LBJ is the first to align U.S. policy with Israel's policies. Well, I'll be damned. Learning some history tonight. On the crucial issue of the Dimona inspection, the Israelis ignored JFK's condition and the reactor went critical on December 26. When the inspection occurred 3 weeks later, they could not inspect the areas that had been irradiated. A handwritten comment on the report says, "We were supposed to see this first!" Exclamation point there. We do not know what would have happened if JFK had been in the White House, but given the intensity of his effort and deep convictions regarding the dangers of nuclear proliferation, it would not have been ignored as it was under LBJ. Under LBJ, relations with Egypt deteriorated. The U.S. stopped providing direct assistance loans and grants to Egypt. The U.S. became increasingly antagonistic to President Nasser, as desired by the Israel lobby. This is the information that RFK leaves out. That if JFK would have lived and won that second term, the Zionist movement wouldn't have spread as much as it did. We dropping heat tonight. The DOJ efforts to require the American Zionist Council to register as a foreign agent became increasingly weak until they were dropped under LBJ's new Attorney General, Nicholas Katzenbach. The sequence of exchanges includes, so they talk about how they wrote that letter, yada, yada. I'm going to jump forward a little bit here. In the summer of 1964, Nicholas became Attorney General. Negotiations continued. The DOJ staff noted that AZC was stalling and not providing acceptable information despite the increasingly special and favorable treatment. In the spring of 1965, the DOJ accepted that AZC was not required to register as a foreign agent. So you see what happened here, folks? They were able to stall and push back on this for so long until after the point where JFK was then assassinated, LBJ becomes president. The new attorney general also pushed for this, but they were able to stall for so long. Eventually, it got to the point where the U.S. government gave in, and that inspection did not happen. Neither did the two-state solution, the self-determination for the Palestinian people, neither the right to return. This is the last piece here. An increasingly aggressive, uncompromising Israel. The successful development of nuclear weapons added to Israel's aggressive actions and unwillingness to resolve the Palestinian refugee crisis. With intelligence information provided by Washington, Israel made a surprise attack on Egypt, Syria, and Jordan in June of 1967. The Six-Day War was a crucial turning point in Middle East history. Israel quickly defeated the unprepared combined armies. In the West, public perception of Israel changed overnight. The mythology of Israeli military and general superiority was created. Among American Jewish population, doubts and concerns about Israel evaporated and support skyrocketed. If you haven't had a chance to do so, go ahead and smash that like button, buddy. This is deep. Shout out to Rick Sterling for this article. Again, Rick will be here Friday. It goes on to say Israel leaders' arrogance and deceit are exemplified by the attack on the USS Liberty during the Six-Day War. The communications naval vessel was monitoring the airwaves in the Eastern Mediterranean when it was attacked by Israeli aircraft and boats. 34 U.S. sailors were killed and 172 injured. Amazingly, the ship managed to stay afloat. The plan was evidently to sink the vessel, blame it on Egypt, and consolidate U.S. support and hostility to Egypt and the Soviet Union. And ladies and gentlemen, here we are. This event was covered up for decades. And this is the last piece here. Again, shout out to Rick because he did the damn thing. We do not know for sure what might have happened had JFK not been assassinated. It is possible that Israel would have been stopped from acquiring the bomb. Without that, they may not have had the audacity to launch to 1967 attacks on their neighbors, seizing the Golan, West Bank, and Gaza Strip. If the Zionist lobby had been required to register as foreign agents, their influence would have been moderated. Perhaps Israel could have found a reasonable accommodation with Palestinians in one or two states. Instead, Israel hardened into an apartheid regime, committing increasingly outrageous massacres. As Kennedy warned in 1960, Israel has become a garrison state surrounded by hate and fear. The assassination of JFK ensured Zionist control of Israel, suffering for Palestinians, and permanent instability. Eric, can we put the link to that article in the chat so people have that on their own as well? Shout out to Rick Sterling for that article. Again, he'll be here Friday. He's going to talk about this and some other things as well about how this is relevant today. But the point is, people, next time someone comes to you and they say, well, they have to do this because of Hamas. Did they have to do that attack on 1967 because of Hamas? No. AIPAC was never registered as a foreign agent, should have been. They continued to stall to make sure that didn't happen. And it's true. Public support for it would have decreased, wouldn't have increased if they were registered as a foreign agent. Yet you have the DOJ going after activists and socialists in this country and calling them Russian agents. But here you have an entire organization that's lobbying in Congress, and they've got over 400 congressmen and women under their damn control. But you're going after the activist who's in the street saying, stop the wars. I truly believe that if JFK had lived, I truly believe we would have had a different country. So RFK, when you talk about your father and when you talk about your uncle, make sure you mention that part. Let's go to some of the comments here in the chat. Shout out to Zen Master, says it's Festivus for the rest of us. Zen Master has been a member for 1 month. Give Zen a big whoop whoop. Thank you, Eric. At this point, Sabby, I wouldn't be surprised if the Israeli state played a role in the assassination of Malcolm X. What did they say? When I reported that, they said, sorry, I'm getting comfy. They said FBI, NYPD, and I thought there was another one, but that would be interesting. Thank you for the super chat medal. I think that JFK was better on Palestine than RFK Jr. is now. God damn. Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. Oh, I think my camera's a little fuzzy. Okay, there we go. And thank you, James. RFK must feel like a dumb bell. Thank you, Muhammad. It saddens me to think many good people have been assassinated in this country. Thank you, Sabby, and stay well, everyone. And thank you, Willis. This is why you're invaluable, Sabby. Thank you, sis 100. Oh, thank you so much. Look, we gotta do the truth. We gotta drop the truth bombs tonight. Again, Rick will be here Friday. So shout out to Rick for that article. Mint Press News, folks. Mint Press News. Okay. We're going to our next story about the 3 Israeli hostages that were killed in Gaza. It appears that there were 3 hostages in Gaza. They were shirtless, waving a white flag. In other words, saying, hey, surrender, that kind of thing. And the IDF killed them. They were Israeli hostages. Now, I'm going to show you the picture because I'm just going to make an educated guess here, okay? Because they'll try to say like, well, we didn't know if they were Hamas or not. Ergo, pretty sure dude here on the right with the red hair, pretty sure dude is not Hamas, okay? Just throwing it out there. Just throwing that out there. So these were the victims. IDF says Israeli hostages killed in Gaza were bare-chested and waving a white flag. They're bare-chested. Obviously, you can see they don't have any weapon underneath their shirt or anything like that, right? Let's get into this clip here from Case Study QB where they dive deeper into the story. Because again, this just goes to show you, as I've mentioned before on the show, the IDF will go after anything and anyone. They don't care. They don't care that. So when the advisor to the freaking prime minister, what's his name? Mark Regev, when he makes these comments that like, we're trying to do everything that we can. That is a damn lie. Okay. The government is full of liars. That's a damn lie. You're doing everything that you can. And I told you before, it was never really about the hostages. They don't give a fuck. Let me play.
And we begin with new confirmation of a hostage killed in Gaza. The Israeli Prime Minister's office says 27-year-old Inbar Hyman died while held captive by Hamas. Officials say she was abducted during a festival on October 7th. And news of her death comes as Israel Defense Forces admit to inadvertently killing 3 other Israeli hostages. Officials say the 3 men were waving a white flag when a brigade opened fire on them on Friday. The IDF says the 3 hostages had either managed to escape or were abandoned by their Hamas captors. The office of the Prime Minister now says there are 129 hostages who remain in Gaza. 21 hostages have died. A source tells CNN that the head of Israel's intelligence agency is expected to meet with Qatar's prime minister to discuss getting hostages released. Today, families of the remaining hostages held a rally in Tel Aviv demanding their safe return. CNN's Alex Marquardt was there. Alex, how are people reacting to the reports of the accidental killing of 3 and then the report of the other young lady who has died?
So first of all, in reference to the accident, how is it an accident when they were shirtless and they were waving white flags? You'll see a comment from Norm Finkelstein that I'm going to show later on as well, where Norm Finkelstein actually explains that this is common practice for the IDF to even shoot and kill people that are waving a white flag. They don't care. That's the thing. It was never about the hostages. The IDF has run amok. Let's continue here.
Well, Frederica, this was a rally that would have happened anyway on a Saturday night, but this really gives it more sadness, because of the news today that in Briahna, one of the hostages is now dead, and the 3 hostages being killed by Israeli forces just yesterday. So there's a lot of sadness, there's a lot of shock because of the event yesterday, and there's a lot of anger. The people we're speaking with here calling on the government to get the hostages to home now. We keep hearing the word achshav in Hebrew, which means now. But we are getting more information from the IDF about exactly what happened yesterday. And the chief of the general staff, so the top general, making clear that it was the Israeli soldiers' responsibility, that they did violate the rules of engagement when.
Pause. So once again, we have another example of the IDF or the state of Israel violating rules of engagement. But they've been violating the rules for years. The settlements in the West Bank are illegal, but no one has come in and stopped the state of Israel from continuing to build settlements. How many rules and laws do they have to break before someone holds them accountable? They've never followed the rules. Like that's the point. But so what? So what? You announced this on CNN. They've announced it on MSNBC. They've announced it on all of network television. Okay, great. We know they're not following the rule. Where's the accountability? What's going to be done? And this is because the United States government has basically given the state of Israel a pass. You basically let them do whatever they want. They are seriously committing genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza, and there's no accountability, no pushback. All we get are speeches from Kamala Harris and Joe Biden that say you must abide by the rules, but they're not. They're clearly not. They can do whatever the fuck they want. And this is a big part of the problem. There's no accountability. Now, let me ask you this question. Those 3 hostages, Israeli hostages that they were so desperate to get back, were killed by the IDF, not by the Palestinian people, not by Hamas, right? Has Hamas killed any of the hostages yet? Do we have that information?
These 3 hostages were killed, and it's just so heartbreaking because they were on the cusp of freedom. They had spent more than 70 days in captivity and were just about potentially to be rescued by the Israeli soldiers when they were shot and killed. These 3 men were seen as threats, according to the IDF. Some of the soldiers engaged, shooting and killing 2 of the hostages immediately. Another one of the hostages fled into a building and started shouting in Hebrew. A brigade commander called for a ceasefire. That didn't happen. The firing continued in the third.
Pause. We're going to go back. Okay. Let's go back a little bit because there's something he said here
about potentially to be rescued by the Israeli soldiers when they were shot and killed. These 3 men were seen as threats.
They were seen as a threat, but they were shirtless and waving a white flag.
According to the IDF, some of the soldiers engaged, shooting and killing 2 of the hostages immediately. Another one of the hostages fled into a building and started shouting in Hebrew. A brigade commander called for a ceasefire.
The brigade commander called for a ceasefire. This is now the third hostage was actually shouting in Hebrew. The brigade commander called for a ceasefire. They killed him anyway. Now I want you to compare this to the police in the United States, because the IDF trains the police in the United States. That's where they get their tactics from. So the IDF tells you that they saw them as a threat. How is that any different from when police officers tell you that they saw the person that they committed police brutality against as a threat? They were resisting. Here are these men waving white flags and shirtless, and you thought they were a threat. Even when the commander told them to cease the fire, they did it anyway. That is intentional. And that is not the IDF trying to prevent civilian casualties. That is murder.
That didn't happen. The firing continued and the third hostage was killed. The bodies were confirmed to be those of the hostages once they were taken back into Israel. There is some speculation that they may have escaped from captivity, as you said, or maybe that as the Hamas militants left their positions, that they simply abandoned these hostages. So the head of the IDF apologizing, saying this is absolutely tragic, but also that this is a highly stressful combat situation in which there have been a lot of terrorists dressed in civilian clothes who've been carrying explosives, and that had made the situation a lot more complicated, Fred.
They were shirtless. They were shirtless.
And then, Alex, I mean, the IDF has launched an investigation, into these deaths. They have admitted that this happened, but how do they win the confidence of family members who are outraged? I know we have not heard directly from the family members of these three hostages who have been killed, but I mean, clearly people are outraged that this could even happen. How does the IDF respond to their concerns now about the safety of the remaining hostages?
It's very difficult, and what the Netanyahu government needs to do in the eyes of so many of the people out here is to show that they are willing to talk and willing to try to get these hostages home.
Listen to the rhetoric that she just used. She said, what about the safety of the remaining hostages? Those three hostages were not killed by Hamas. They were killed by their own people. They were killed by their own.
What this incident yesterday has done is made people so much more afraid for the hostages who remain inside Gaza, their well-being. We know that there are hostages who have been released and their families who have accused the government and the military of not knowing where they were in Gaza, of carrying out strikes near where they were, which resulted in some injuries. I spoke about this with the daughter of one of the hostages who was released 2 weeks ago. We spoke with them just moments ago. Take a listen.
They heard all the bombing, and they were very, very frightened that the bombing will be falling on them, that they will die from the army missiles.
The shelling.
Yeah, and they told us they didn't believe that the army really knew where they are, because they were shooting very, very close, and they heard all the loud noises of that bombing. And I really think that we should do anything to stop the war.
So that part right there is interesting, because she tells you that they didn't really know that basically Hamas was saying that the IDF didn't really know where they were, which proves once again that what Israel is doing, they're just bombing everything and everyone, and that they're not trying to avoid civilian casualties. Norm Finkelstein actually talked about this as well. He said there's shock that Israel killed 3 civilians. As it turned out, Israelis who had been taken hostage carrying white flags. But killing civilians carrying white flags is standard operating procedure of the SS. He calls it the Satanic State. And he listed a report here, a 63-page report that's based on field investigations of 7 incident sites in Gaza. So that piece here, which is from the Human Rights Watch, They said white flag deaths. This was reported back in 2009, killing of Palestinian civilians during Operation Cast Lead. So just FYI, guys, this is a long thing. I'm not going to go into all of this, but this was an issue back in 2009. So again, these things are not new. Now, what's really interesting is where Biden stands in all of this. And I just want to show you something that's been reported recently by The Nation, which honestly contradicts what Biden says when he's like, we have to worry about, the children and all that kind of stuff in Gaza. That's actually not true in how he feels. The Nation reported Biden's close alliance with Israel has been a lodestar of his work in foreign policy. During Israel's 1982 war with Lebanon, he went so far as to claim that women and children would be legitimate targets in Israel's campaign for greater security. So you see this? He already knew, and that's The Nation. Biden's Israel policies are still on the wrong track. And I'll just jump to this piece here. Let me jump ahead here. It says Biden went on to call Netanyahu for Israel's indiscriminate bombing campaign in Gaza and warned that it was costing the Jewish state critical worldwide support in the wake of the horrific October 7th terror campaign that Hamas launched against Israeli civilians. These were welcome, if far too incremental, developments for a Biden White House that's repeatedly stressed that it is not seeking to impose red lines of any sort on Israel's campaign of mass death among Palestinian civilian populations, even as it's done precious little to eradicate or displace Hamas operations. So here they are calling out Joe Biden, and they're basically telling you, like, if you read this whole article, if you pay attention to Joe Biden's track record in the past, he did not have an issue with this. So again, Biden's Israel policies are still on the wrong track. Now, that is The Nation. And they bring up the issue with the 1982 war with Lebanon. And something I want to remind you of as well. You have to remember that Ronald Reagan, during the time when Israel bombed Lebanon, Ronald Reagan called for a ceasefire. When Ronald Reagan called for a ceasefire at that point in time, that was not a popular decision. It isn't the way it is now, where the majority of Democrats, even some Republicans, are saying we need a ceasefire. That was not the case during that time. So Ronald Reagan called for that ceasefire when it was unpopular to do so. And obviously he took more heat. We are now living in a time where it is popular to do so. The majority of Democrats want you to call for a ceasefire, and Joe Biden is refusing to do it. So that shows you that even when it came to this particular issue, Ronald Reagan was to the left of Joe Biden when it came to Israel bombing other countries. Now, the United Kingdom and Germany have now decided to call for a ceasefire. And I just think it's really interesting because before they didn't want to call for a ceasefire, but now that 3 Israeli hostages were killed by the IDF, now Germany and the UK are willing to call for a ceasefire. You guys see how this is going? Morning Joe talked about this. Let's go ahead and get into it.
This hour, the United Kingdom and Germany are now joining the growing calls for a ceasefire as Israeli troops continue to ramp up their attacks across Gaza. Israel has come under increased scrutiny over protecting civilian lives after soldiers mistakenly shot and killed 3 hostages on Friday. NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel has the very latest.
The 3 Israeli hostages in Gaza made white flags to warn their own army not to shoot, smearing SOS in old food and writing in Hebrew, "Help 3 hostages." The Israeli military released the images overnight, saying the hostages were nonetheless mistakenly shot by Israeli troops. Israel's chief of staff told soldiers the friendly fire could have been avoided, saying the hostages took off their shirts so that no one would think they have an explosive device and held a white cloth on a pole to identify themselves. They came speaking Hebrew, calling for help, he said, telling the troops never to shoot anyone with their hands up. The families of hostages still in Gaza are outraged.
You guys hear that? Don't shoot anyone with their hands up. Connect that to police in the United States shooting people that have their hands up.
Calling daily for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to resume negotiations with Hamas and bring their loved ones home.
I am angry that the government let this situation get so far. I am angry at the world that is not supporting a deal right now, because this is the only way to bring them back home. And I am angry right now, I'm angry at all.
Opinion polls suggest Israelis remain united in their support for the war in Gaza to destroy Hamas, but not in Prime Minister Netanyahu's leadership. Under U.S. pressure, this weekend, Israel opened a second crossing into Gaza for humanitarian supplies, but it's still far too little. 12-year-old Rosan Al-Habash, displaced from her home in northern Gaza, says she waits in line for hours to get food for her family. Every day I wake up at 8 and leave for the food bank. Sometimes we spend the day without eating anything, she says. Human Rights Watch this morning accused Israel of using starvation as a war crime.
That's right, because for those that may not die due to actual bombing, they may die because of starvation.
Yesterday, with international pressure growing, the Israeli military continued to make its case for the offensive, releasing video of what it calls the largest tunnel it's found underneath the Gaza Strip, and showing a man the military identified as the brother of a top Hamas leader driving through it. NBC News has not been able to verify the footage.
And Richard joined.
They weren't able to verify the footage, but they thought they could show it anyway. Okay.
Joins us now live from Jerusalem. Richard, how is Israel responding to the pressure from the families of the hostages?
Well, officially, the Israeli government has issued many statements of condolences, many statements of regret. The chief of the army has said that this was unavoidable. Prime Minister Netanyahu said he bows his head in respect and mourns with the country. They've said officially that they will continue to put pressure militarily on Hamas and continue the war. But what we are seeing now is also, and the Israeli government isn't linking the two, is we are seeing a resumption of ceasefire talks, and those ceasefire talks are underway now. NBC News can confirm with the director of the CIA, the director of the Mossad, and senior Qatari officials. So the talks are back up, trying to secure some sort of hostage deal, but the parameters are not totally clear. I'm told by people directly involved in these conversations that so far the Israelis only want to talk about tactical issues. They only want to talk about the hostages, how many hostages could be freed, under what terms, how many Palestinian prisoners might be freed, and that Hamas and the negotiators themselves want to talk more strategically about a longer-term solution, how to get out of this crisis. And Hamas has made it clear what its term is. It wants, if there is to be another ceasefire, it wants to be a permanent ceasefire, not just another week and then Israel resumes again. So still very difficult negotiations ahead, but they are happening now.
Well, I've always said from day one, if they really cared that much about the hostages, they would have called for a ceasefire. Now, this isn't the end of this, because it is actually now you have the Houthis in the Red Sea. They have actually intercepted some of the weapons that the U.S. government is trying to send to Israel, because Yemen said, not up in here. Yemen said nobody else is going to protect or look out for the Arab countries. We're going to look out for one of the Arab countries, and we're going to tell you, not up in here. You are not going to continue to do this to the Palestinian people. Nico had some things to say about that. And it's also, I want to play that, but also I want to tell you that the U.S. government was actually also trying to pressure Saudi Arabia to join them with this alliance and to try to fight against the Houthi rebels in the Red Sea? Saudi Arabia said, hell to the no. Saudi Arabia said, hell to the no, no. We're not getting in your mess anymore. I told you Saudi Arabia was that fair weather friend. They walked away from the United States. They got other friends and they said, you guys on that crazy shit, I'm going to be hanging out with China and Russia and you guys on your own now. So Nico talked about this. I thought this was really interesting. Nico's been doing these clips from Hotspot, Nico and my comrade Nick from RBN, where they do like these little short clips and they break it down. Yemen, U.S. to announce expanded protection force for Red Sea shipping.
So the United States has announced expanded protection for Red Sea shipping. And the reason why is pretty simple. Yemen has been giving Israeli shipments all of the work they could ask for. Already, 5 big shipping companies have now stopped their ships from using the Red Sea in wake of attacks mounted by the Houthis in protest of Israel's genocide in Gaza. Now, I want to be clear about that because this article tries to say that it's because they're protesting the elimination of Hamas. That's not it. They're protesting genocide, so I just want to be clear. Even BP had to suspend shipping. Despite knowing that the United States has their back, they were like, y'all might have our back, but this ain't about to be the day that we figure out whether or not the Houthis are liars. So to combat the Houthis holding down the Red Sea in protest of the genocide that is happening in Gaza, allegedly the United States plans on putting a coalition together that includes Israel, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, UAE, of course the US, France, and Great Britain. Now, of course, the United States and Israel, of course, and France and Britain, we kind of expect. But what in the Uncle Tom is going on with Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the UAE? What makes this even more interesting is that we know that Saudi Arabia and Yemen have had a bit of a tumultuous past, to say the least, considering Saudi Arabia was funding a genocide in Yemen. But they were actually on the verge of a peace deal that the United States is not pressuring Saudi Arabia to break in order to form this coalition.
This is a piece that I think the United States government wasn't prepared for. I think they thought that because, the U.S. government, we were the ones giving weapons to Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia used those weapons on people in Yemen. Yemen is pretty much, it's sad. Like if you see the pictures of the country, what it looks like now, it's really sad. It's pretty much been demolished for the most part. But I think the U.S. government thought that we helped you, we gave you weapons to fight against Yemen. So now you're going to return the favor for us. And Saudi Arabia is like, no, I'm good, bro. Saudi Arabia is like, yeah, we just hung out with Vladimir Putin. We're actually all good. You guys do what you need to do, but we're all right, bro.
And Yemen has made it clear that if Saudi Arabia and the UAE join this coalition, of course, that would violate the peace deal, and they're just going to bomb the shit out of their oil and gas field. I think what makes this a little bit more frustrating is the fact that you see the average person from Saudi Arabia and the average person from the UAE and the average Arab from even Egypt all supporting the Palestinian cause and calling out Israel's genocide there. And yet the leadership of these countries are selling out their people, selling out their culture, and selling out their brothers and sisters and cousins in Palestine on behalf of the United States and a NATO power that would betray them the moment it's convenient. So let's hope that this coalition never comes into fruition and that Saudi Arabia and the UAE will continue this peace deal with Yemen, because that's definitely better than allowing shipments to continue to get through to Israel that would just let them have supplies that they'll continue to use in the genocide of Gaza. I mean, I feel like a peace deal is probably better for everybody than the latter.
Yeah. But it's the fact that, again, like not so much the leaders of those countries, but it took the Houthis. So you can see here, I'm not going to play the video because it's straight up mad propaganda. But it says breaking, the U.S. military has announced a 10-nation coalition against Yemeni Houthis in the Red Sea. Only one Arab country, Bahrain, is part of the coalition. Saudi Arabia and the UAE rejected the U.S. proposal to join. Dun, dun, dun. Saudi Arabia said, not this time, bruh. You guys are on some of that psycho stuff, so we're done with that. Now, there's also this issue about financial support, because this is a piece that's often left out. As much as Netanyahu and other government officials are criticizing Hamas, you have to also remember that Israel actually funded Hamas. Case study QB reminded me of this with this clip here. We have to bring it back in. Guess where the money came from?
Richard, want to ask you about this latest update about Israeli officials learning how Hamas was financing its operations back in 2018 and apparently did nothing about it. This is according to the New York Times, which reviewed documents that were pilfered from the computer of a senior Hamas official. The ledgers listed assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars, including skyscrapers in the UAE and a real estate firm listed on the Turkish stock exchange. The Times writes this was a potential roadmap for choking off Hamas's money and thwarting its plans. The documents were shared with Washington, but the Times reports none of the companies faced sanctions from the U.S. or Israel for years. They were also never publicly called out or pressured by Turkey to shut down. Instead, officials were focused on putting financial pressure on Iran. Now, according to the Times, tens of millions of dollars flowed from the companies to Hamas at the exact moment that it was buying new weapons. Israeli and American officials now admit that money laid the groundwork for the October 7th attacks.
And Richard.
So you see what they're trying to do, right? They're basically, this is Israel trying to blame other countries for Hamas being able to get funding in the first place. But you have to remember, again, especially in the beginning, Israel gave money to Hamas. They funded them. But now they're trying to put the blame on the other countries.
On top of that, we, of course, got the report that Doha, just a month before the attacks, asked Netanyahu's government, do you want us to continue funding Hamas's government? And Netanyahu's people said, yes. What's the reaction in Israel?
See, they have to admit these things now on mainstream media because so much information has come out from independent sources, and especially the students. I told you guys, the younger people, they're very resourceful, so they've been able to find this extra information. So of course, now they have to admit it on Morning Joe that Israel knew. They knew.
So if the question is, how is it that Hamas got so rich under the watch of Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu? The answer that many Israelis have and have had for a long time is that having Hamas in power in Gaza benefited Prime Minister Netanyahu because he had an obvious enemy. He had an extremist in power on the Palestinian side in Gaza, at least, who we did not have to negotiate with. So
because it benefited Netanyahu. And by benefiting Netanyahu, it benefited the state of Israel. He wanted them to be there. Does everybody understand that? He wanted them to be in power.
Therefore, it was very easy. You close off Gaza, you leave Hamas in power, and then you can say to the world that there is no other solution, that there is no partner to deal with, as opposed to having a more moderate, reasonable government that you want to talk to on the Palestinian side. Because if you talk to a moderate, reasonable government on the Palestinian side, then you have to cut a deal. You have to have a two-state solution. And this government has made it clear it does not want to have a two-state solution. And if that's your basic arguing point, you don't want a two-state solution, then it helps you if you have someone else on the other side who doesn't want a two-state solution either.
Ding, 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 ding. I'm surprised they allowed him to say this on MSNBC. Bingo. Exactly. He wanted them to be in power so that he could say that there was a threat and that he would not have to abide to a two-state solution and that they are always the common enemy. He wanted them to be there. Just like the New York Times said that they knew over a year ago that they were planning this attack. Why would you not do anything? Maybe because they wanted it to happen. So they have a reason to wipe out the Palestinian population in Gaza. Now, another thing that's been happening here, connecting this to this as well. If you have not seen this, there was actually a Harvard professor's wife who harassed a student, a Harvard student who was walking down the street wearing a keffiyeh and basically said she was wearing a terrorist scarf. This woman used to work for the Obama administration. This is a liberal who are making these comments. So this goes back to another example I want to show you, where you have these white bougie liberals, particularly in these progressive areas, like we have some here in Massachusetts, that they pretend like they're tolerant and they're accepting of everybody, but they have their bias and their racism too. And this is another thing. Again, you don't see as much mainstream media talking about this because it's happening to someone on the other side. But if it were the other way around, and if it was someone saying this to a Jewish student walking down the street, it would be blasted all over the media everywhere. They would talk about it nonstop. They would be in Congress trying to set some type of legislation in place for people walking down the street. Kid you not. But because it's not, she issues just an apology, and her apology is whack. Katie Halper focused on her apology. Listen to this.
A professor at Harvard's Kennedy School and a former Obama advisor. And she's speaking to a Harvard graduate student wearing a keffiyeh who was walking down the street. Let's hear what Eve Gerber had to say.
Thank you for walking through neighborhoods and making families feel unsafe with your terrorist scarf.
Palestinians felt pretty unsafe when Israelis occupied their country, you know.
So this woman that you see here, hold up, let me go back. You see her? You see this passive aggressive? Watch this.
With your terrorist scarf.
That, you see that? That's the same type of white liberal racism that you tend to see here in the Northeast. That's not a Trumper. That's not a Republican. That's a liberal. A Harvard professor's wife. I told you they're racist too. This is what I've been trying to tell people. Do you know how thrilled I was to see this video? Don't like what happened to the student, but I was thrilled to see this because I said I've been trying to tell people this for the longest time. They're racist here too. The liberals, the Obama friends, the people who worked for the Obama administration. These people are bougie, racist liberals. They're not yelling and telling you to get out their country. They don't have on a t-shirt that says, go back to where you came from. They may not be calling you the N-word. No, they do bougie, passive aggressive racism. They'll follow you down the street to make you feel a little bit uncomfortable so you don't feel like you can walk through that neighborhood anymore. Now, she apologized.
Palestinians felt pretty unsafe when Israelis occupied their country, you know.
I'm glad you're so proud of the slaughtering of civilians.
I'm not.
But don't worry, guys, because Eve has apologized. She took to Twitter to say, on 10/14, after I overheard chants I found disturbing at a rally near my house, I spoke with a person on my block who I thought had come from that event. When the political argument escalated, I used indefensible words. I was wrong to confront someone based on their dress and to use divisive, accusatory language. In the 2 months since this video, I've tried to learn more and take reparative action. I will continue to do so. Hate and inhumanity in any form are abhorrent to me. I deeply regret what I said and did. But what has Eve learned and what reparative action has she taken? Because this non-apology strikes me as victim blaming and continuing to play the victim. See, she's saying that she only said those things because she thought the woman she yelled at had come from the rally. She says, after I overheard chants I found disturbing at a rally near my home, I spoke with a woman on my block who I thought had come from that event. So Eve is still defending her logic. Eve's mistake was assuming the woman had come from that event and assuming that she had participated in the chants Eve finds disturbing.
This is another thing that they'll do. The racist white liberals. This is another thing that they'll do. Oh, I didn't know. I thought she was coming from the rally. Even if she was coming from the rally, that does not give you the right to do what you did to her or say what you did to her. The point being, she's still racist. Period.
Chances are the chants were something like from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, or Intifada. But the problem is that neither of those chants is genocidal or calls for violence against Jews. But Eve is weaponizing victimhood to stigmatize what are actually calls for equal rights for Palestinians. So Eve has a lot more learning and reparative work to do.
Yes, she does. And here's another thing. Have you noticed where are all the people that were crying and saying that the Jewish students need to be protected and feel safe on campus? Where are all those voices in reference to what happened to this young woman walking down the street? Where are those voices? She's a student. Where are all the voices about that woman being harassed, walking down the street, minding her own business? Oh, you don't hear those voices now. You know why? Because she's not Jewish. She's not Israeli. So they don't care. It was never really about that. It is about backing supremacy. It is about degrading the Palestinian people. And why would they choose to back supremacy? Because of all the organizations and the lobbyists that are connected to the Zionist movement and the people who are involved. It was never really about that. But at the end of the day, you just saw 3 Israeli hostages were killed by the IDF. They were killed by their own people. Where's the outcry, Bill Ackman? Oh, Michael Rappaport, you got to rant every other 5 minutes on Twitter. Blah, 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 blah. Every time I turn on Twitter, I see this guy got his mouth open, whining like a little bitch. Every time. You going to say anything about that, Michael? Barry Weiss. So terrified, so afraid. We got to protect people and save people. Where's your comment about that, Barry? Silence. Let's go to some of the comments here in the chat. Killier Gordy says the IDF are following the Henry Kissinger protocol to kill anything that moves. That policy did get him a Nobel Peace Prize in 1971. Thank you, Gonzo. The UK called for the ceasefire 45 minutes after BP said their freighters will not go through the Red Sea, not the death of hostages. Interesting. Thank you, Nelson. Thank you, Sabby, for always bringing us great content to open our minds. You are welcome. Thank you, Obama loves Larry Sinclair. Israel is Hamas, he said. Thank you, Dijon. Great show, Sabby. Keep it going. Thank you. Thank you again, Obama. YouTube blocks negative comments about Netanyahu on super chats. Of course they would. Thank you for the super chat, Jay Tolbert. Breaking, federal judge orders the unsealing of documents that would make the names of Jeffrey Epstein's associates public. Yes, I actually tweeted about that earlier today. I'm going to hold my breath, though, and see if this actually happens. Okay? If you have not had a chance to do so, go ahead and smash that like button, guys. We are moving on to our next story here. I'm actually going to do the crime story. I'll come back to the crime story, Eric. We're going to move on to this story here. Briahna Joy Gray actually had a debate here on Rising with a journalist that supports, she's more so speaking on the Israeli side of things. And I thought that Bree handled this so incredibly well. But the mountain of lies that this journalist said throughout this interview, Brace yourself for this one. Brace yourself.
Like the visual images of the atrocities happening in Gaza, the 18,000 people who have been killed in the last 2 months, the bulk of whom are women and children, the 10,000 estimated children that have been killed, the destruction of 80% of housing stock, et cetera, and the critique from the international community has actually had a significant effect on the public perception of Israel and Palestine, United States, such that demographic groups that once disproportionately favored Israel in this conflict are flipping the other way. If you believe that Iran are bad faith actors in all of this, what do you think should happen in Gaza that would not enable them to continue to say, well, look, there's a real humanitarian crisis going on here. The reason we should all be on side is to stop the humanitarian crisis that Israel is inflicting upon Gaza, as opposed to the framing that you offered, world domination, exporting terrorism, those kinds of things.
Right. Great question. And I love the way that you set it up very well. Most people do not know all the nuances that you just referred to, but I will start with this. There are two wars currently going on. One is in the Middle East between Hamas and Israel. It is not the first time we have seen Hamas and Israel fight. When you see Hamas and Israel fighting, that's where I alluded to Iran being the funder and the entity that trained these terrorists. So it's really a proxy war between Iran's regime and Israel, and that will remain in the Middle East. The other war that we're watching is the narrative war that is being pushed by the mainstream media.
She is advocating for going to war against Iran. She's insane.
College campuses. We're seeing social media obviously being a huge culprit in all of this, in choosing sides based on these false narratives. You alluded to a death toll. There absolutely have been many innocent Palestinians killed. I'll be the first one to say that. We don't know the exact death toll because, again, it is coming from Hamas. It's coming.
We don't know the exact death toll because it's not coming from the Israeli government. We're the only ones that can be trusted when it comes to the information war. Anything that's coming or is being reported out of Gaza from the Palestinian people or from a Palestinian outlet, you cannot trust. But because we're the state of Israel, you can trust what we say. You have been caught in lies multiple times. Multiple times.
From the Ministry of Health inside Gaza, which is run by Hamas. I will also point to the fact that many of these casualties are what we call collateral damage, meaning Israel, in its duty to defend itself and to eradicate Hamas, is going in and finding Hamas fighters, many times using their innocent civilians, babies, children as human shields.
She's talking fast, so let me show you what she's doing. Notice how she's using the same talking points. This is what they all continue to say. By the way, it's standard PR move. They continue to say, defend itself. They continue to say, Hamas basically, hides among the population, that they hide among the civilians, that they use them as human shields. They continue to say, we have to eradicate Hamas. See, they continue to use those types of talking points because if you continue to say that you have to defend yourself against this group of people, technically it would more likely resonate with people. But the problem with this particular war is that it's not resonating with a lot of people because people are seeing the images that are coming out of Gaza. And more so, a lot of younger people have educated themselves about the history of this conflict. So there's that.
Them in hospitals, creating situations where their own constituents, their own civilians are in harm's way, not evacuating them in time, etc. Look, this is not pretty. It's war. And I think a lot of what is lost here is what happened on October 7th. I hear John Kirby really banging his head against the podium every other day when he has these press conferences, again, reminding reporters to start at the origin of all this, which is October 7th. Even if we want to go beyond that, this is a terror organization that is running or in charge of the leadership of the Palestinian people inside Gaza. So when people talk about the disproportionality, let's start with the fact that we're fighting, or the world is fighting, a terror organization with Israel doing the dirty work.
The world isn't. See, you see this? The world is fighting this. with Israel doing the dirty work. No, the world really isn't. There are a couple countries that have sent weapons to you, primarily the United States government. Saudi Arabia ain't even on your side, boo. Saudi Arabia isn't even on the United States government side. This is Israel's war. Think about this now. These other countries didn't do this to the Palestinian people. They didn't encage these people. They didn't kick them out of their homes. They didn't build illegal settlements. Israel did those things. But she wants to implicate everyone else.
It's very, very unfortunate that this has become so, choosing sides. I mean, in Los Angeles here over the weekend, we had pro-Palestinian protesters became very, very violent. They vandalized a church and many apartment buildings along the Wilshire Quarter near UCLA.
Now what you do in turn as part of narrative control and the PR, now you try to smear the other side in the sense of, let's say that these are violent people. They did the same thing with any other protests that we've had. When it came to the police brutality protests, same thing. These are violent people. Now all of a sudden she's calling the pro-Palestinian people violent. You see this? So then they try to get you to, basically they're trying to get you to fear the protesters the same way they feel that you should fear Hamas. That's what they're trying to do.
Graffiti. There were swastikas on 4 or 5 different buildings that I personally saw. I did a walkthrough early morning before they were able to cover up the graffiti. Now, it's a long stretch to connect a swastika with Bibi Netanyahu's policies in Israel. This has turned into open and unashamed anti-Semitism all over the world. And that's where we have to stop it. We have to correct the narrative here. And again, if people are really interested in the geopolitics of it, I remind you to go back and look at what Iran's regime is doing, where they're putting their money, how they're treating their own citizens, and ask an Iranian inside Iran who's been on the streets for the last year with the protests that unfolded after the 22-year-old Mahsa Amini was killed for not wearing her headscarf properly.
Iran has nothing to do. See, what she's trying to do is turn this back onto Iran. Iran has nothing to do with the way that the state of Israel has treated the Palestinian people. They have nothing to do with that. You can say, yes, Iran gave money, they funded, Hamas, they supplied them with weapons. You can say those things. But Iran has nothing to do with the way the Israeli government has treated the Palestinian people from day one. As I read to you earlier, the story about JFK, that told you the history of it. That revealed everything. This was always the plan. So let's divert to Iran. Right to defend yourself. Hamas is using people as human shields. These are the same phrases they all continue to say. Oh, and also anti-Semitism.
Ask those women who are taking to the streets how they feel about their government, how they feel about Israel, how they feel about the war going on right now. You'll get a more accurate answer out of one of them than you will from the influencers who are leading the discussion on social media.
There's a lot.
Notice how she made it about Iran?
There. I guess I can start by asking you, you said that this started on October 7th, but of course, as many people point out, this is a conflict that's been going on for 75 years since the 1948 Nakba, during which 700,000 Palestinians were forcibly removed from their homes in Israel, and many of whom were forced into Gaza. The population in Gaza is largely, even before this crisis, an itinerant migratory population, refugee population. And of course, some of the most egregious early bombing campaigns that we saw in Gaza were those that were targeting, or at least they hit, whether or not they were targeting, hit various refugee camps like Jabalia within Gaza, and then, along with UN targets and other hospitals, churches, mosques, universities, and other places that seem to have no tactical or military relevance. Of course, we know that Israel has repeatedly claimed that Hamas is under every building an innocent person it has hit. But as we've just reported earlier this week on the show, an Israeli analysis, along with other international analysis, showed that Israel has been doing a worse job of avoiding civilians than any other conflict zone in the world in the last 20 years. The ratio of civilians that have been hit as compared to their own articulated stated targets has been wildly askew. That being the case, and given that this is rooted back in 1948, and the fundamental concern that is being raised by people in Palestine and much of the Arab world is the ongoing occupation of the people of Gaza and their inability to have their own
sorry,
state.
I have to stop you right there because there are a few things.
See, they don't like it when you start to, let me tell you something. You guys ever notice something? Her, Mark Regev, anyone that's speaking on the side of Israel, they don't like it when you start to use words like occupation and oppression. They don't like that. And they always want to interrupt at that point. I kid you not, right? Because they don't want you to see the state of Israel in that light. But that's exactly what we have here. That's exactly what we have here. We watched Marianne Williamson tell Lauren from Fifth Harmony that the people were not occupied, only to have to come back. She was so firm about her position, only to have to come back and apologize on Twitter that she didn't realize that was going on. Now, I don't know how that's possible, considering we've been talking about this for years, but they do that on purpose. They won't even let her finish what she's saying. It's like they hear those words. It's, wait a minute. No, we got to stop that. Because remember, she said she's there to correct the narrative. So she's trying to change the narrative. And the words occupation and oppression don't change that narrative.
Well, I didn't interrupt you, Ms. Lisa. I didn't interrupt you. Well, look, I let you say what you wanted to say. You characterized the protests in ways that I would not. They were protesting Joe Biden's visit to LA. You made a lot of characterizations that I would personally object to, but I just want to narrow it down if I could and ask you about what do you say to people who say this conflict did not in fact start on October 7th, that prior to October 7th, Israel had already killed hundreds of Palestinians. The death toll of Israel killing Palestinians has always historically been higher than the other way around. And is the fighting ever going to stop if the people of Gaza and the people of Palestine aren't allowed to have their own freedom?
See, when she came onto this show, she wasn't expecting to have to talk about the history. She was just expecting to talk about October 7th moving to present day, right? So she probably wasn't prepared for that. Now, look at her reaction.
I mean, there's so much to correct here. And I say correct because this is what I do for a living. In terms of its history, you said so many things that are incorrect. In 1948, even prior to that, the Palestinians were offered two states. They were offered their own state. And at that point, they would have a larger state than the state of Israel.
They were offered two states and they decided not to take it. So that gives Netanyahu and the state of Israel the right to commit genocide against their population.
Then if you want to move forward, the number of casualties, well, why are they massacring Jews, innocent civilians, and not expecting there to be any sort of retaliation?
Who was massacring who first? Who kicked who off their land? Killed them. And for the people who tried to, they tried to also do the sexual abuse thing because they thought that would really resonate with people and say they sexually abused these women and the women and the children and all that. And neither one of those things worked this time around. But you should also know that when they going back to 1948, when they forced them off the land, not only did they kill some of them and force some of them off the land, but they also assaulted some of those women.
The Biden protests that you're talking about, yes, it was in the reaction to Biden coming to Los Angeles for a fundraiser. But were there not swastikas on buildings? Was a church not vandalized here in Los Angeles?
How do we know that graffiti wasn't there prior to October 7th? There's graffiti around. Look, I don't think there's one bridge you can drive under in Eastern Massachusetts that doesn't have some type of graffiti. How do we know that graffiti just got there? How do we know that graffiti wasn't there from years ago? She don't know.
I mean, when you talk about the disproportionality in numbers, you're framing it in a very dishonest way, and that's why I have to stop you. If we want to have some sort of dialogue about this, we have to start with facts. We can't just be throwing out emotional things like the Hamas says. Gaza was evacuated in 2005 and given to the Palestinians to have self-determination of Gaza. In 2007, they voted in an election Hamas. Hamas is the
doesn't want to go back. She wants to go back in time, but she doesn't want to go back to 1948. Right? They only want to talk about the history in reference to when Hamas came into power. They don't want to talk about the fact that the people pushed them off the land, the people brutalized the people before Hamas even existed. They don't want to talk about that.
Official leadership of Gaza. So when they're not moving their constituents out of harm's way and that death toll goes up, and then you talk about why is there a disproportionate death toll? Israel does its best to remove people. And if you've seen the flyers, I've seen them, I've been there. I've actually seen how they get people out, and they actually go with the loudspeakers and the megaphones and they try to get them out, which absolutely goes against their military strategy, by the way. They allow people.
Goes against their military strategy. So the actual strategy that they have is to not warn and alert the people. Let me just say something here, because this is where she starts to get, I think, this is where she's going to start to get a little bit emotional. Let me say something here. There is nothing that Hamas did that warrants the reaction that Gaza is experiencing right now. The level of bombing, the children, the schools, the hospitals, none of that. But see, she is there to simp for Israel. She is there to make it look like Israel is the good guy. And after a certain amount of time, I don't even understand how pundits can defend what Israel's doing. Even mainstream media is starting to turn against the narrative.
People to move out, and Hamas tells them not to. We saw the footage of Israeli tanks escorting Gazans out of harm's way. We saw the United States go to bat to get American Palestinians out of Gaza when the Hamas would not let them out.
We saw Israel tell them to get out of northern Gaza, and we saw people walking to southern Gaza only to be hit in southern Gaza as well. We saw that too, Lisa.
I mean, we have to talk about facts in order to, again, come up with a better solution going forward. If there should be a two-state solution, are we dealing with the Hamas that does not want to live side by side within Israel? It's actually in the Hamas charter to eliminate Jews, not just Israel.
That's literally not true, Lisa. It hasn't been true for years. And so you're telling me that I don't need to be emotional. I don't feel like that's what's happening here, Lisa. It sounds like you just said a lot of things that were factually untrue. For one, I don't know if there were swastikas at that event, but I do know that there was recently.
What do you mean? It's
oh, here she comes. See, emotional.
It's out there. It's not. Not my opinion.
Let me ask. Let me finish my thought. Like I've let you. I don't think anyone could dispute that. I just let you speak until you naturally finish. Okay.
You're absolutely right.
But I do know that there was just yesterday or the day before yesterday a scandal where in San Francisco someone alleged that someone wrote "Free Gaza, Kill Jews, Allah Akbar" on a wall. The Muslim community was outraged because Allah Akbar, A-L-L-A-H, is not Arabic and is not the phrase that was trying to be gotten across. It was clearly a framing attempt from someone who's not even familiar enough with the language to accurately even do a false flag. So with all of that going on, I would rather stick to the facts that we do know as opposed to what happened at a given rally where the overwhelming majority of people were simply protesting what the international community has now characterized as an ongoing genocide. And I just would like you to answer the fundamental question here. You say that Gazans had self-determination and that Israel very politely evacuated Gaza so that they could live there. But of course, as you well know, they're not allowed to have an airport. They're not allowed to come and go. Israel controls their access to water and electricity and the internet. You know that they were put on a calorie restrictive diet so that they calculated how much people need to survive to be just above starving and allow that exact number of calories to come within Gaza. And that's the state.
See, she's shaking her head because she doesn't want. See, these are the things they don't want you to hear. They don't want people to hear just how bad the state of Israel has been treating the Palestinian people. That's the thing. That's why she's shaking her head like how dare you talk about the way that we've treated them? And kudos to Bree for pushing back on the charter, because a lot of them are telling that lie too. So there's a difference between, especially if a charter has been rewritten, shouldn't you go by the newest charter? But a lot of them have continuing to carry on that lie.
They were living under occupation up until October 7th and throughout. So the question is, do you expect that there will be an end to the fighting? Do you expect the Gazans to stop resisting their occupation if they never are allowed to have genuine self-determination?
Says this. Listen, how many millions of dollars this massacre on Israel cost Hamas? Why?
She don't want to answer that question.
Wasn't that money put into giving them more calories? Why are they spending all their money and resources on creating bombs instead and tunnels instead of using those pipes to give the Gazans clean water?
Let me pause here for a second. See, now she gets emotional. Let me explain something, folks, because we're going to talk about oppression for a second, okay? When you are occupied and someone else controls the resources and they control your freedom of movement, you cannot then in turn blame the people who are occupied and oppressed for their own suffering, Lisa. You know, it's just some of these things, you know, we'll talk about the systemic issues and we'll do the comparison with the United States as well. It's like for the indigenous people that were pushed onto the reservations, those that survived compared to those that they killed off. It's like pointing your fingers at them and looking down on them and saying, you know, why didn't you do this? And we told you could have a casino. So why didn't you do yada, yada? You can't do that, especially when you're not the one that's in power. How dare they not use money in a way that they should have used it? What the fuck does that have to do with them being occupied and them being oppressed? What does that have to do with that? So it's okay for you to put a fence around these people because they didn't use the money that you felt they had in the way that they should have? Hell, if that's the case, Lisa, should we put a fence around people in the projects like they used to do back in the day and tell them only to move from point A to point B? And if they end up in another neighborhood, it's okay to call the police and kill them? Is that what you think, Lisa? So people who are living in poverty, people who are struggling, it's their fault if they were born into it. Imagine being born in a cage. These people are fenced in. That's their fault. This is the arrogance of people like Lisa. She said the quiet part out loud. She's blaming the oppressed. See, I told you this wasn't just about Hamas. She's blaming the Palestinian people. She's blaming the oppressed. It's their fault. How can you blame the people who are occupied for being occupied when the people who are occupied have no damn control and they're not in power and they don't have the resources? How can you? How can you? Why you sit up there and you protect this racist regime? How can you? This is the craziest shit I've heard all day. I remember I watched this interview. I said, I'm going to watch this twice. I watched this interview twice. And I said to myself, Lisa's a damn fool. Because while Bree sat there so calmly debunking her talking points, Lisa was the one that got outraged and got emotional because Lisa couldn't answer the questions about why Israel's been occupying those damn people.
I mean, I'm sorry, but you're framing these questions in a way that it's like there's a lot of logic. We're talking about a terror organization that does not care about the Gazans, and you're asking for the international community and Israel, the United States and the UN to care more for the Gazans than their own leadership does.
I would say they do care about the Gazan people. You know, it's like you're born occupied. You are born occupied. And you expect those people to just sit there and just deal with it? Would you have made excuses for slavery, Lisa? Would you have made excuses? And said, well, the Europeans didn't know how to grow rice, so they had to bring people over to grow rice. Would you, Lisa? Because that's what I'm starting to think. That's what I'm starting to think. Well, Israel had no choice because, you know, they were supposed to live there and it's the Holy Land. So they had no choice. And then they had to kick the people out because of Hamas. The people were kicked out before Hamas even existed. The displacement, the aggressive displacement and violence against the Palestinian people, and then the occupation of the Palestinian people is what gave you Hamas in the first damn place. So everybody want to start with Hamas, but they don't want to talk about how we got there.
Let's start with step one, calling out Hamas as a terror organization. Step two, calling out the massacre of October 7th as a terror attack. Step three, talking about Iran's regime responsibility in all this in funding Hamas and training those Hamas militants. Step four, I did an article in 2014 that got me put on the Hamas hit list where I interviewed dozens of Palestinians living in Gaza that said that they blame Hamas for the trajectory of their lives and not Israel. These are realities. The Palestinian people are in fact victims. They're not victims of the international community and Israel. They're victims of their own leadership, whether it's the PA or Hamas. And that is what we.
How are they not victims when you cage them in? They're not victims of Israel, but Israel caged them in.
Have to talk about the caloric diet. I mean, and look at this massacre that happened. If you
what
were
about
Israel,
the caloric diet? Do you want to finish that thought?
Point?
What about the caloric diet? Do you want to finish that thought? How do you justify keeping a population near starving?
Listen, the Hamas needs to provide more for its citizens. Doesn't need to spend millions of dollars.
How should they do that? How
Look
should
at all
they
the
do that?
humanitarian aid that went in. How much of that do you think lands?
The food comes from Israel. Israel decides what gets through those gates and what doesn't. What does that have to do with Hamas?
Are you aware that there's a blockade on Gaza? Ma'am, are you aware that there's a blockade on Gaza? Gazans aren't even allowed to fish off the coast of their own land because of the Israeli blockade?
This is absolutely, is absolutely not true. It's not true. Listen to this. The checks that they have on Gaza is because of pure security. When they use an ambulance with a fake pregnant woman inside of it to conduct a suicide bombing on the border or come into Israel, this is why they need to have a checkpoint there. Does that not make sense? Does Israel not have to protect itself for things?
What does that have to do with denying them the right to fish off their own coast? Denying them the right to have access to clean water? Denying them the right to have certain food come into God? What does that have to do with all of that? And who is Israel to patrol that any damn way?
Things like October 7th not to happen over and over again, the way Hamas has sworn it will happen over and over and over again. And to the international community that's calling for a ceasefire, we would all love to see this war end. But before you call for a ceasefire, call for those hostages to be released. Call for Hamas.
The 3 hostages that were just killed by the IDF? Those hostages? Because where are you at on that, Lisa?
To put down its weapons. Call for Iran's regime to stop supporting terror organizations. This is what we all want. We would love for there to be Palestinians and Jews living side by side in peace. All of the world, all of the countries in the Middle East living side by side in peace.
Look at this. Who's doing the terrorizing, guys? Who's doing the terrorizing? Who's the one committing genocide right now against the Palestinian people? Hamas or the state of Israel? Who's the one kidnapping children from their parents and putting them in prison? Who's the one doing that? Who's the one having these men stripped down to their underwear and get on their knees and humiliating them in the public square? Who's the one going around harassing and assaulting the Hasidic Jews that are anti-Zionist in Israel? Is that Hamas doing that? No, that's the IDF. Who's the real terror here? This is the same type of narrative that they use for victims of police brutality in the United States. He should have turned around when he said so. Why were you resisting? Why did you look a different way? Why did you do that? You're blaming the victims instead of blaming the powers that be that's in charge. Instead of blaming the state of Israel, instead of blaming the IDF. The IDF, I feel, is a terrorist organization. And I've watched videos of them go into people's homes and pull out their freaking kids. That's not Hamas, Lisa.
But it has to start with rooting out terror organizations that use the people's money to conduct a jihad and not give them food, not give them water, not give them shelter.
Lisa, here's a question I have. What if in the course of rooting out Hamas, as Israel is doing now, there are so many civilian casualties that we create more Hamas fighters in the future, relatives of the people who died, Hamas becomes a more esteemed organization because of all the death and destruction, and Israel actually makes its security problem worse. That's the fear I have.
Sure, that's absolutely, I mean, look, what you're saying could be true, but what's the alternative? For Israel to sit back and say, well, try again, or maybe, you know, and the fact that they're letting 3 terrorists out of prison for every 1 civilian hostage that they get back.
That's not true. At a certain point, it becomes
absolutely true. I don't understand where you guys are getting your talking points from. This is,
by the way, this is a journalist. Okay, this is a journalist, you guys.
Absolutely true. I mean,
ma'am, the idea that every statement that is not uncritically supportive of Israel in every respect, including the ongoing genocide in Gaza, is a talking point or somehow being a mouth point for Hamas is a way to silence is a way to silence the discourse around this really important issue. So look, we appreciate you coming and speaking your piece on the show today. Thank you for joining us.
Woo, honey. The tea was hot with that one because I honestly, I watched that. I told you I watched it twice. I watched that and I was just like, oh my God, this is really, really bad. But there's been a lot of lies. There's been a lot of lying. We're going to go to some of the comments here. Thank you, Willis. Daftari is an Indian surname. She is a Indian. Thank you for the super chat, Roger. She said, correct the narrative, not adhere to the facts. That's true. Thank you. Obama loves Larry Sinclair. The leader of Hamas is not even in Gaza. Why are they bombing Gaza? They're not looking for Hamas. Thank you, Willis. Go in, Sabby. Colonialists can't deal. Anti-views. Thank you, Janice. More importantly, how could they use the money to get more food if Israel doesn't allow it in? WTF. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Israel still controls what comes in. And thank you, baby Ethernet. The caloric diet, changes subject, clown. Yeah, she didn't want to talk about that. I don't think she was expecting to have to talk about the history. I think she thought she was just going to talk about October 7th. Interesting. One more story tonight. We will do call in tonight. If you haven't had a chance to do so, go ahead and smash that like button. But I do want to get to this story here. This is a rather quick one, but it did come across my way that I thought you guys might like to hear this. It's about the U.S. crime rate. So it says that most people think the U.S. crime rate is rising. They're wrong. So this is a recent article. Almost 80% of Americans and 92% of Republicans think crime has gone up. It actually fell in 2023. Let's get into this a little bit here. This article came out the 16th. And it says crime in the U.S. has declined significantly over the last year, according to new FBI data that contradicts a widespread national perception that law breaking and violence are on the rise. So again, this is looking at national data. According to some cities, obviously some cities are going to have a higher crime rate than others. I'm sure if you looked at like San Francisco's crime rate may be higher than like Raleigh, North Carolina, so to speak. But on a national level, they're saying that crime has actually decreased this year. A Gallup poll released this month found that 77% of Americans believe crime rates are worsening, but they are mistaken. The new FBI data and other statistics show. So the FBI data, which compares crimes in the third quarter of 2023 to the same period last year, found that violent crime dropped 8%, while property crime fell 6.3% to what would be the lowest level since 1961. That's according to criminologist Jeff Asher, who analyzed the FBI numbers. Murder plummeted in the U.S. in 2023 at one of the fastest rates of decline ever recorded. And every category of major crime except auto theft declined. This was news to me. News to me. Yet 92% of Republicans, 78% of independents, and 58% of Democrats believe crime is rising. But that's because that's what the mainstream media has been telling us. How many times have we covered it on this channel when they talked about the crime rate? At least we talked about San Francisco, the crime rate in San Francisco. That's because that's what mainstream media has been telling us. So people think that. I think we've been conditioned and we have no way of countering the idea that crime is rising. Asher said, it's just an overwhelming number of news media stories and viral videos. I have to believe that social media is playing a role. Now we have to be careful here too, because again, this could be another push for them to try to censor social media. Oh, people have this misconception because social media is reporting negative or false news stories. And that's where they're getting it from. Or they can point their fingers at TikTok and say it's because of the TikTok stories, right? But the reality is, even mainstream media has been telling us this year that it has been increasing, not decreasing. But they're not going to tell you to eliminate mainstream media, right? The FBI's quarterly numbers cover about 78% of the U.S. population and don't give us as full of a picture as the more comprehensive annual report the FBI puts out once a year. But Asher said the quarterly report in the past have hewed fairly close to the annual ones. The most recent annual report released in October covered 94% of the country and found that violent crime in 2022 fell back to pre-pandemic levels, with murder dropping to 6.1%. Asher maintains a separate database of murder in big cities, which found that murder is down 12.7% this year after rising during the pandemic. Detroit is on pace to have the fewest murders since 1966. Asher found while Baltimore and St. Louis are on track to post the fewest murders in each city in nearly a decade, a few cities, including Memphis and DC, are still seeing increases in their murder rates, but they are outliers. If you want to see the stats, you can go to FBI Crime Data Explorer, and they already have it selected for us. They already have violent crime here, so we can see it. You can select different crimes as well. But here's that data. Violent crime percent change by population group, quarter 3 in 2022 and quarter 3 in 2023. And you can see here, you can see that we're getting a decrease. Now, this is labeled in reference to population of these cities. So, and then they have metropolitan counties and non-metropolitan counties for the peeps out in the boonies. And then here's by region. So you can see here is like -11 Northeast. That's me. Same for the Midwest. In the South, I think that's -9. And the West, -9. And the total there brings them all to like a -8. So it kind of makes me wonder if some of those videos that have been shown before, like on CNN and MSNBC, especially the ones with San Francisco, those are a lot of the ones they've been focusing on. It kind of makes me wonder if they just want us to get hyped up and get scared, right? They want us to be afraid and want us to think that crime is increasing rapidly so that they can argue for more police funding, thus another way to increase population control, to control the population. That's what it makes me wonder. If we tell the American people that crime is rapidly increasing, then they'll become afraid and they'll want to find a reason to protect themselves, obviously. So they'll want to increase police presence. Just something to think about. We are going to do call in. I'm going to take a quick break. I said bake. A quick break.
You're going to take a quick bake.
No,
might have a whole new show happening here.
A quick break. I'll be right back and then we'll head to call in.
All right. Here we go on, what is it, a Tuesday night. I'm Eric T. Red. I'm very often in the background, but once in a while I come up here to the foreground to give Sabrina a little break before we jump into call-in. If you want to get a head start, that call-in link, I threw it into the chat, and Sabrina usually posts it as the pin chat. But yeah, she'll be back shortly, and then we'll transition into our call-in. Yeah, JB's got it. Baking with Sabby. I'd tune into that, would you, right? But yeah, we do a little break here. You can do call-in on your computer. It's pretty easy if you just want to listen. You can even throw a mic on if you want. You can do call-in on your cell phone and do it that way. And that's where we get to hear what you think, which we like to hear about. You can talk about the stories we talked about tonight. Actually, let's see what call-in looks like at the moment here. She's got it posted. So like if we look at like what the room looks like here. There we go. Call-in tonight. Norm Finkelstein interview recap. So I guess we can talk about that. Then, yeah, we had the stories on JFK revealed, IDF stuff, Alec Baldwin. We can talk about this crazy Zionist that Bree had to correct until she finally had to kind of pull her mic. Sorry, just adjusting something on my other screen. Oh, don't do that. There we go. Yeah, so let's hit that. We had some comments coming in here I want to tag and look at and talk about. Whoever said propaganda is rising. Yeah, I mean, there's this whole aspect to this about propaganda and narrative management. And, one of the things I put in the chat sometimes, narrative management is failing. And I do think that's happening. There is a certain narrative that they want to keep in place. And, of course, what I always say is it all goes back to the money. If you want to know why we have these wars, and why they keep happening, why Israel's doing what it's doing, it's about money and resources. And when you dig down even more, you get to this thing of, you got this very small group of ultra wealthy people, the rich billionaires, they're tools to mega corporations, and they're using that money and influence to corrupt the whole system. And that's the corruption that we have to get at. Thanks for the super chat. Obama loves Larry Sinclair, saying they took Trump off the ballot in Colorado. Well, I guess that's one that we'll have to look into. And I'll remind you again, this is where we give Sabrina a little break, and she'll be back shortly before we transition into call-in. I guess I usually try to remember to put up our banner here that says that says, or there you go, Colin starting soon. There we go. Let's see. We had a chat here about the crime story from Roger Meadows. What type of crime, Sabby? Because white collar crime that happens in the boardrooms of corporate America is always up. And I'll certainly agree with Roger on that one. There's it's an interesting thing when you talk about crime statistics, right? And crime in general, that's what they always mean is the crime that's happening with poor people, that's happening, or with working class people or whatnot. And there's always this differentiation between the crime that really happens up in like Roger says, in the boardrooms. Basically everything the billionaires are doing is a type of crime of stealing so much wealth and resources. But you have banks, you have one home loan bank scandal after another, and they get slaps on the wrist, which is takes a few bucks out of their pocket. What about that crime? And that's I think a movement that's focusing on corruption would also have a real focus on that kind of crime and calling it out. And baby Ethernet saying, I'm in Baltimore, crime does seem better. I mean, it's an interesting thing of there does seem to have been a steady decrease in crime and in crime stats of the traditional street crime and those kind of things that we think. And there are different theories behind that. One of the big theories that's out there is about lead in paint and in gasoline that has been taken out of the environment, and there may have been a real effect of that on a lot of people's minds. And I think that's an interesting theory that does point to a difference between then and now. There are things like standards of living, maybe changing in some ways that lead to it. It's a whole topic, about that and the real reasons behind it. But it does seem like that aspect of things is kind of improving in a general way. And then this woman who's supposedly a journalist, this Lisa, talking about Palestine. I mean, it was like that RFK interview all over again. And it feels like these people who are like really hot on Zionism and really putting out these points, and like RFK, it's almost like a mania there. And I do think they are at some level really like these true believers, and they get arrogant, and they get so sure of themselves, and just so sure that you're wrong. And whenever you hear arguments made with that kind of emotion and that kind of hubris and certainty, it's time to kind of take a step back and say, that's that's a problem. And it can be kind of frightening to see these people sometimes in person. There's it's what I try to personally have a scientific way of thinking about things. And if you view anything scientifically, really any strong evidence that goes against your prior beliefs, your priors, you really need to consider. And sometimes you do have to take a step back and change your priors. And if you're not willing to do that, then you're really, I hit the wrong one. There we go. We didn't want to get that close. If it's but when strong evidence comes in that shakes your worldview, that kind of goes against it, then if you're truly a rational and scientific, or at least rational thinker, you have to reevaluate your priors when that happens. And it's clear that some of these people who are so into what they're saying are really either incapable or just unwilling to do that.
Yeah, I totally hear you. For a second there, the close-up reminded me of those 90s music videos where Puffy was all in the camera, like, take that, take
going that. Again. Oh.
Take that. All right, guys, we are going to do
the call-in.
All right. Let's do the damn thing. Okay, guys, that call-in link is pinned to the top of the chat. I know we didn't get a chance to talk after. I don't think we did. I'm not sure if we got a chance to talk after the Norm Finkelstein interview. No, we didn't, because that premiered on a Saturday. So we can talk about that. We can talk about the JFK reveal, the IDF situation with the hostages, Alec Baldwin, etc. What else you want to chat about? That link is pinned to the top of the chat. So let's head on over there. You know how we do this. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.